What are dialectics? Does anybody know? Chances are, if you looked online, apparently nobody. Now you must be asking yourself, how the hell is it that 200 years after a guy is dead and has been studied to death, nobody has written anything intelligible about the so-called backbone of his philosophy, his methodology? Why the hell are dialectics so difficult? Well, to answer that, we gotta do a bit of history. Hegel is, unfortunately, not a philosopher for beginners. He is what is called a philosopher's philosopher. That is to say, he didn't write for the beginning layman, but for the erudite masters of philosophy. This causes a couple of problems. One is that he wrote for an audience that was already acquainted with a certain tradition of philosophy, and if you're not acquainted with that, you're lost. Second is that he assumes that you're an erudite in his philosophy. And if you're not acquainted with that, you are absolutely lost. Hegel is a systematic philosopher, and as such, he refers back to things that he's already written, to things that he's already solved, things he's not going to explain, and which he expects you to know. Now, of all the important things in Hegel, the method is the most important. Most know and call Hegel's method by the name dialectics. Now, this is a bit of a misnomer. One, because Hegel never called his method dialectics, and second is because dialectics are just one aspect of his method. Now, we could blame Hegel for all the terrible misinterpretations of his philosophy, thanks to the fact that he wrote terribly, or at least some people claim he wrote terribly. I don't think he's so bad. But if you did that, I think you'd be wrong. Because there actually is one work in which the method is absolutely clear and just cannot be misunderstood, and that is in the science of logic. Hegel tells us in the prefaces to the Phenomenology and in the prefaces to the Science of Logic that his method is not formulaic, it cannot be formalized, and that is that. The only way to see it is to do it. And the one work where this is beyond crystal clear is the Science of Logic. The very first chapter is all you need in order to understand the method perfectly well. And what is the method? Hegel gave no name to his method, but other philosophers have done the job for him. The name that is given is immanent critique. Critique from within. Now, what the hell does that mean? Well, for one, it means that there is no external content or form brought into the inquiry. If you're going to think being, you're not going to think being according to essence or existence or physics or colors or experience, whatever have you. You're going to think being as being. You're not going to choose a method of analysis because it seems useful to you, or it seems to provide the most pragmatic or practical results, or it seems to provide the most interesting results. Those are all subjective injections from outside. They have nothing to do with the actual content you want to deal with. As such, there is no formula to this method. There is no thesis, antithesis, synthesis garbage, and there is no abstract negative concrete. The first thing to do with Hegel's works in dialectics is to stop looking for a formula. That is the one-way ticket to misunderstanding everything. These formulas may seem helpful because they seem to appear in the results. But notice that only in the results. They don't actually tell you about the method itself. They don't tell you how to generate a dialectic. They don't tell you how to think along with Hegel. So, to summarize that major point, the first major point is there is no method. A second point about that is dialectics are actually a result, not a method. Now, I'd just like to point out a bit of the character of a dialectic in Hegel. On the level of dialectics, Hegel's method produces a very strange result, a bouncing back between ideas, concepts, from one to the other and back again infinitely. So what is the method of this so-called immanent critique? Well, this kind of analysis does not use any conceptual resources outside of its concept or object to critique it. It does not presuppose a form it must conform to. By this, it is meant that one basically follows the train of thought set by the concept, the relations already within it, and those that it brings up out of its own content and their relations. The content being investigated leads the investigation itself, and the immanent critic is more like a detective observing carefully for their suspect to justify or incriminate themselves, yet never once stepping in so that it remains clear to all that it was indeed the suspect's doing. In simplified terms, what is aimed at by such an analysis can be considered three things. 1. Testing coherency. 2. Testing stability. And 3. Testing for a claim to logical or material independence. In other words, testing for a claim of being a coherent absolute. And that's it. And you may be thinking, wait, that's it? Yeah, that's it. Literally that simple, nothing to it. Which is why, by the way, it is impossible to formalize it. The form depends entirely on the content you're investigating. You do not and cannot know the form until you've actually met the content and worked through it yourself. This very simplicity is what makes Hegelianism so difficult. It requires you to think, and not just think externally or formally, but to think through content, something which most people, even philosophers, are just not used to.